You're listening to the DolphinsTalk.com podcast network. Welcome to Dolphins Talk Weekly, your one-stop audio breakdown of all of this week's Miami Dolphins news. Now, here is your host, Kevin Dern.
Happy Monday, Dolphins fans, and welcome to another edition of Dolphins Talk Weekly. I am your host, Kevin Dern. You can follow me on Twitter at KevinMD4, and you can follow the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever else you listen to your podcasts. We are back recapping the Dolphins' 31-17 season sweep of the New England Patriots, a 31-17 victory at Hard Rock Stadium earlier today as I record this on a Sunday night. Big win for the Dolphins, keeps them at 6-2 and in first place in the AFC East, headed into a massive showdown in Frankfurt, Germany, against the Kansas City Chiefs this coming Sunday. Huge game with huge implications, and quite honestly, I can't remember being this deep in a season with a regular season game that mattered this much in terms of playoff and conference standings for the Dolphins, while being at the top of the playoff totem pole in quite some time. I would have to do some actual research and figure out when the last time that was. My guess, probably when Dan Marino was the quarterback. If someone knows another game where they were battling for a 1 seed, into November, let me know, because I don't remember it. Anyway, we'll dive into the Chiefs talk at the end of our episode here. Just wanted to apologize for not getting an episode out last week. I knew in advance, I think I said as much after the Panthers podcast, that I wouldn't be able to get an episode out Sunday night after the Dolphins game against Philly, and was going to try and record Monday night, but we ended up with our 1-year-old coming down with a case of croup. Had to do some extra legwork at the office because of other travel involved with our team. And then by the end of the week, we had our 3-year-old with a stomach bug, and it's just been zero fun and not much sleep for the past week. Fortunately, the sports weekend kind of boosted my morale and wanted to record another show tonight. First, a quick shout out to my former teammate Alex Garvin and the Kings Knights, winning their first round playoff game over our bitter rival, the Loveland Tigers, 38-17 on Friday. Good luck to Kings as they take on the number 1 seed Anderson Raptors this Friday. But that wasn't all. Arsenal with a convincing 5-0 win at home, staying not quite at the top of the table, but within striking distance of Tottenham, and an impressive road win in the Champions League midweek over Sevilla. And the Dolphins took care of business on Sunday against the New England Patriots. So for that, we are back on the whiskey segment, but decided to do something a little different. Was going to go back to the Lagavulin 11, but because it's been a stressful week, I'll admit I've sipped on the Lagavulin 11 quite a bit, and I've actually found a nice discovery that once the bottle is open and you let it breathe a little bit, you get that more flavorful burn instead of the, spicy burn at the end of it with the charred cask, which is excellent. But for tonight, we've got the Peerless Limited Edition Rye is what we're going with tonight. We've had this one on the podcast before, but something different in the spirit of that the Dolphins are doing something different this week and playing a game in Frankfurt, Germany. So victory over the Pats, and Prost to the German trip this weekend. Delicious stuff. A little bit of a different one for me. I'm not usually a rye fan, but I like that one. So, since we didn't have a show covering the game at Philly, I'll just give you some general thoughts. Thought at the time that was Miami's probably best defensive performance of the season. I was very worried about how they would play, especially with some of the light box stuff that they've been doing all season against Philly's run attack and held them under 100 yards on the night. Really only one big run to DeAndre Swift, and that was really after the game was out of hand. If not for the brotherly shove or tush push or whatever you want to call it, converting those fourth downs, Miami did a really nice job on defense. It's just with Philly, you've basically got 3 downs to keep them from getting 8 yards because they're going to get it most of the time. Now, I do know prior to the Dolphins game, they'd only been stopped once on the season, but that was with Vita Vea in Tampa, a human earth mover. And then the Washington Commanders stopped it today. They forced the ball out of Jalen Hurts' hands, probably something they picked up from watching Jalen Phillips on Sunday night. He almost punched it out of Hurts' hands on the touchdown one. Neither here nor there. The defense played well. The issues in the secondary, which are really only issues by choice given the personnel, kind of burned them in the end. You had the long kind of play right before the half, which led up a score, picking on Perry Nickerson, and then you had Kader Kohu downfield against A.J. Brown. I mean, that's just a losing battle, and it burned Miami. And I think we learned that against a front as good as Philly's, who is the number 1 run defense in the NFL by a pretty good margin, I think they're like almost 12 full yards average ahead of number 2, which is Detroit. You can't run the ball well, and you probably can't withstand the heat, missing your left tackle and your starting center for the entire game and having your left guard go down 5 plays into the game. Not a recipe for success. Despite all that, and Tua did have the one bad interception. Despite all of it, though, to go in there in that environment with the personnel shortcomings that Miami had, thought they played pretty well. They acquitted themselves well, and the narrative of they can't beat good teams is, after the last 2 weeks of what we've seen around the league, is kind of dead. I saw a great tweet by Joe Marino today, who's on the Locked On Bills podcast and does a joint podcast with Kyle Krabs. There is no transitive property in football, and I think that rings especially true today with some of the games that we've seen and some of the outcomes that we've seen. Denver knocking off the Chiefs, holding them under 10 points, forcing 5 turnovers. We saw the Commanders, again, almost beat Philly. They've been close twice now this season. The Bengals go to San Francisco and really kind of shredded them and, made Brock Purdy look pretty bad in that ball game. So not overly concerned, with Miami losing the game in Philly. I think Vic Fangio was right, and he said, that's about as good as a defense performance you're going to get when you give up 31 points. But again, just a couple plays away. And, it is what it is. It's a tough loss, but ultimately it's against an NFC opponent. It doesn't matter in the grand scheme for AFC playoff seedings. Today's game against New England did, and next week's game against Kansas City certainly does. So I was pleased to see how Miami took that loss to Philly. They moved on. I forget which player it was, but said, whoever we play next, they're going to feel it. And Miami was pretty physical today. And we're going to start there on defense to lead off our recap of the 31-17 victory over the New England Patriots. It was a defensive first type of day. You had Jalen Ramsey's return. Nick Needham also returned. I think it's going to be pretty fun when you get Jalen Ramsey, Xavier Howard, Kader Kohu, Javon Holland, Deshaun Elliott, and then Nick Needham as your dime corner. If you can get all those guys rolling, it's going to be pretty fun to see what this defense looks like all incorporated. Because right now, the front 6, and let's call it a front 6 because that's what they play, is an absolute buzzsaw. It's tough to run on them. We'll dive into some of those run numbers here in a minute. But they did really well against Philly last week. They did even, kept up more of the same against New England. Today, held them under 80 yards rushing, and then third in the league in sacks with, I believe, 27. After 3 more today, Christian Wilkins, Bradley Chubb, and Jalen Phillips all getting in on the act today, taking down Mac Jones, and had a bunch of other hits too. Sealer had a couple nice ones. Just a really nice performance by the front. We've really seen David Long play well. I think Fangio finally has the front 6 rotation kind of figured out and down. Andrew Van Ginkel took a dip in snaps today, only played 14 on defense, but they quit pussyfooting around with trying to make him an off-ball linebacker. It was a gut shot experience from Fangio, or experiment by Fangio that didn't take. He finally stopped it, which is good. Just really impressed with how Miami's kind of rebounded since week 2 on. And if you count every game going into the Sunday Night Football game, so what Miami's run defense averages would have been. Now, this doesn't account all the changes that happened today outside of the Dolphins game, but if you factor in the Patriots game today, for the season, if all the other games had been factored in as well, Miami's run defense would have jumped from 19th to 8th. They've been giving up 95.9 yards per game on 3.9 yards per carry. Both of those figures are better than what they gave up last year in 2022 when they were the 4th best defense in the NFL. If you throw out the week 1 performance against the Chargers, so in other words, since week 2, Miami's run defense is giving up 78.7 yards per game, which would be 3rd in the NFL behind Philly and Detroit. And they've been giving up 3.5 yards per carry per game, which would be tied for 2nd with a host of other teams behind Philly and Detroit. Thought the front 4 today just really dominated. Christian Wilkins had a fantastic game. Zach Sealer, maybe one of his better pass rushing games that we've seen, but those 2 guys really set the tone. And Jalen Phillips, and I texted this to my good buddy Travis Wingfield, who most of you, probably all of you, know by now, but I texted him. There was one particular run stop where Jalen Phillips just tore the absolute face off of, and I'm not being literal here, just figurative, of the right tackle, Mike Onwenu, and just destroyed Ramondre Stevenson in the hole. Travis tweeted that out, and it was pretty funny to me to see some of the hype that got, and someone even offered to send Travis nudes if they got his number. So some comedic relief in the middle of the game for me. But Jalen Phillips was very impactful, had a sack, 7 tackles, I think 1 for loss in there, and multiple run stops. Like I said, Fangio's got the front 6 rotation down pat. It's finally where I would have expected it to be kind of from the beginning of the year. Obviously, Jalen Phillips being hurt plays a part in that. The weird use of Van Ginkel plays a part in that. And I also think Fangio's been a little bit more, I won't say risky or aggressive, but he's flirted more with the idea of bringing a safety down into the box and giving you kind of some 1 lurk and some cover 3 looks, or cover 9 in Fangio nomenclature. Both with Javon Holland last week against Philly, and we saw it more with Deshaun Elliott today, who had a monster hit on Devontae Parker. And Deshaun Elliott deserves an extension. He's been a very nice free agent signing. Still some issues in the secondary, by choice. Maybe Needham's not fully ready yet, or hasn't grasped the full scale of the defense and what he's supposed to do, but you put Justin Bethel out there, he got sombreroed. Mac Jones found him on Kendrick Bourne. That's an easy win on a slant inside when your safeties are deep. Just bad use of personnel. Like, if Needham's not ready, I doubt Elijah Campbell would be much worse if you want to play someone who's kind of a slot inside. Still don't understand their use of Cam Smith and not trusting him yet, but that kind of seems to be a Fangio philosophical thing. Nick Needham ought to be the dime cornerback moving forward. And he himself is no slouch as a blitzer from the slot. He's done it before. I'm very intrigued to see what happens. I don't know that it'll necessarily be this week against Kansas City, but perhaps after the bye, we finally see the defense with all of its teeth. When you think about it, if you're looking at, call it a nickel front, when you have Jalen Ramsey, Xavier Howard starting outside, Kader Kohu in the slot with Javon Holland and Deshaun Elliott, that's pretty impressive. And then you've also got a pretty nice backup group with Eli Apple and Cam Smith outside. Nick Needham can play in the slot. Brandon Jones is a safety. And Elijah Campbell, who had a really nice camp. That's a pretty good top 10. And then you still got Justin Bethel as a special teams type of guy. We'll go ahead and take another sip of our Peerless Rye. Real quick. Just gives me a lot of hope for what this defense could continue to grow into. Obviously giving up the 34 points to the Chargers in week 1, 48 to Buffalo, 31 to Philly, kind of drags your numbers down. But I think the defense overall has been trending in the right direction, and I think you can look at both of the Bills and Eagles games and kind of look at the personnel and just kind of say, there's probably reasons for why Fangio did what he did. I don't think they're good reasons, and I think he's obviously learned from them. But it's going to be fun to see what you can cook up now with the defense being the way it was. I thought Brandon Jones, for the most part, filled in okay. The Patriots run that little slant flat play on the goal line all the time. You could see it coming from a mile away. And Brandon Jones still got caught on the pick. And not even really a pick, just a little cross in the flat. I don't know that Javon Holland makes the play either, but it's certainly a lot closer with Javon Holland there than Brandon Jones. I think that's an area of concern. I know several people have asked me what my thoughts are about the trade deadline, and we'll talk about that later in the show. But really thought the defense did pretty well. I'd make this note too. At least at home, they've been really good on sudden change defenses, and I was looking it up. Miami's defense has not been on the field for 27 points scored at home. So, to take you back, Denver had the kickoff return for a touchdown when it was 70-13. Or, 63-13, I don't remember. They returned a kickoff for a touchdown. Tua Tagovailoa had the pick 6 against the Giants. Mike White had one against Carolina. Tua had another pick that put the Giants in automatic field goal range. And then today, the fumble by Raheem Mostert put the Patriots in automatic field goal range, 27 points. Miami's sudden change defense has been pretty good. You could have surrendered a lot more points than what they have. It'd be nice to see them play a full complementary football game. We really haven't seen that in all three phases in its entirety this year. I think Denver's probably the closest example, but even then, you had the kickoff return for a touchdown allowed by the special teams. Russell Wilson still had a fairly nice day. They just got way behind because of fumbles by other Broncos players. So very interested to see what a full complementary performance by the Dolphins looks like. And then we'll close off the defense with these two things. Back to the front seven. I kind of retract the negative things I said about Bradley Chubb. He's been on absolute fire the last 3 weeks, leads the team with 5 sacks. And then I know a lot of people were talking about Christian Wilkins and, don't pay him. He's not a pass rusher. I call bullshit, and he's got 4.5, which is a career high for him, and we're halfway through the season. He's going to get more. I predicted 7 on another show at the beginning of I guess, back in training camp. I think he's well on the way to that. And then Jalen Phillips finally looks 100% back from that oblique injury. They didn't really take any, precautions today with his snap count. He played the majority of the snaps. Andrew Van Ginkel only got 14. And then, they've gotten to the point now where the rotation's so good that Emmanuel Ogbah has basically been phased out of it. Sad to see, but a good problem to have when you're playing as well as a unit as you are up front. And then lastly, perhaps most importantly, what an incredible comeback by Jalen Ramsey. I won't quote or paraphrase anything from it, but if you can, go to Twitter, or X now, I guess, and look up Cameron Wolf's post-game interview with Jalen Ramsey and some of the stuff that went into his rehab and recovery. Pretty incredible. And then you see him, an interception with a big return. He forced a fumble on another play, which ended up being negated by a penalty. And then you look at Mac Jones's spray chart, everything thrown to that side of the field. So Ramsey was predominantly the right corner today, was either behind the line of scrimmage, incomplete, or it was the interception. You're essentially figuring out, okay, Ramsey's that guy who can play kind of by himself on that backside when you're playing quarter, half, or cover 6. That's a pretty big development, especially now. Once you get Xavier Howard back, he can be a little more chancy on the other side in terms of playing the ball, which he's always been best at. That's a huge development for the Dolphins defense when you can get the full arsenal of players onto the field. Switching gears to the offense, I texted this to Travis as well. It'll be interesting to see his studies with the new job. I personally haven't had time to really dive into all 22, so I'd recommend you follow Travis, listen to his podcast, or another buddy of mine, George Forder, does some great all 22 breakdowns, as does Dante Colinelli. Be very interested to see what they come up with on the all 22 this week. Other than the bad interception where I think Tua either misread it or was completely fooled by the coverage, thought he did some really nice things, especially coming off of his first reads. They talked about it on the broadcast where Belichick had said, essentially, you want to get Tua in a hurry. You want to speed up his process in a way where you get him off that first read and then make him panic to try and find read 2 and 3. I thought he did a very nice job today of getting to reads 2 and beyond. Did well to improvise and step up in the pocket and run. Had the big scramble on third down. Had some other nice completions on the move, which hasn't always been his strong suit. Even dating back to Alabama pre-hip injury, he wasn't very good on the run. And I think Miami had a really nice plan to get Tyreek and Jalen Waddle kind of cooking today against the Patriots secondary, who found ways to kind of shut them down back in week 2. Jalen Waddle especially had some nice catches. The diving one where he kind of slipped and fell out of his break on the short post. Despite that, I thought he and Hill both kind of had some issues with the dropsies today, and just kind of a weird day. Hill had a drop on the screen. Waddle dropped the back shoulder throw, had another one over the middle. There was one where Tua threw it kind of behind him. I don't know if Tua was trying to lead him away from, the kids call it a hospital ball, but just kind of seemed weird. And the two of them, Hill and Waddle, still combined for 15 catches for 233 yards, 2 touchdowns. So combined, that's averaging 15.5 yards per catch. Jalen Waddle finally had a game where you could look at it and say, okay, he's fully back. 7 for 121, averaged 17.3 yards per catch and a touchdown. On the day, I thought New England had a nice plan to stop Miami's run game, and I think we've learned that, especially from Philly, when you're missing Teron Armstead and Connor Williams, it's already hard enough to run the ball, and then Robert Hunt goes out as well. Now, the nice part is Rob Jones came in and played at left guard. He had multiple games as a starter there a year ago. Lester Cotton played some at right guard. He had played there with the Raiders, played there at Alabama, started that game in the playoffs, although I think that was at left guard. But Miami didn't really give up anything in terms of pass rush to New England once those guys came in, and even Keon Smith got in on the action. Fortunately, Kendall Lamb came back. So the offensive line was tested. I thought Miami's plan was pretty good on the fly to kind of spread it around. 10 different players had a reception in the game today. I thought Durham Smythe kind of had a sneaky good game with 3 catches. He's had a quiet season, but he always seems to make 2 or 3 catches a game where they're in key spots or they're nice grabs or, on third down. Just having a nice quiet year for Durham Smythe. Would love to see him get a touchdown. He was close on the one. Kyle Duggar is just an impressive player and smoked him at the 1-yard line. And then I think another development is Chase Claypool is going to get more reps. Had a really nice block on the screen pass to Tyreek Hill on that 4th and 1 conversion, and then did a nice job on the slant route, getting 15 yards and some yards after contact on that play. There's a reason that, Robbie Chosen was inactive today, and it's probably Chase Claypool. I thought they did a really nice job of targeting J.C. Jackson. They got Cedric Wilson one-on-one with him on the goal line to a little quick slant, and Tua puts it right there, easy touchdown. So, just a nice overall game plan in what kind of felt a little disjointed at times because of some of the O-line stuff and because they couldn't run the ball. Raheem Mostert, I think, had 13 carries but was held under 50 yards. Jeff Wilson had 3 nice runs, and then they kind of went away from him. He had 2 receptions. It's just interesting, and I think one of the things I've noticed, and maybe this is just because we're in our own Miami Dolphins bubbles, but man, this fan base tends to panic very, very quickly when things don't go 100% according to the plan, especially as it relates to the offensive line. I think at this point, Butch Berry has sort of earned some benefit of the doubt, and as has Chris Greer. Reinforcements should be coming back. I think Connor Williams was a break glass in case of emergency today. Miami probably felt like they could win the game without him, but he was capable of giving some effort if they needed him. Probably more important to have him next week against Kansas City, or even more so beyond the bye week. And then Teron Armstead is eligible to come off IR beginning Monday, tomorrow as I record this. So you could get some guys back. Now, hopefully everything's okay with Rob Hunt. I didn't see the replay or didn't see the injury. I know they listed it as a hamstring injury, but the team accounts spit out something in the press box and run with that. That's not always the most accurate. It's just something quick that they can kind of summarily put out there. Sometimes it's a little disingenuous. But yeah, just interesting. And we'll touch on the trade deadline real quick. I know that's coming up, I believe, towards the middle or end of November. I haven't really given it much thought. Prior to the season, if you would have asked me, I would have thought they might have made a move for a running back. But then Raheem Mostert's been phenomenal, leads the NFL in rushing touchdowns. Devon Achane was phenomenal in the games that he got steady work until he got hurt in the Giants game. He is due to return after the bye week. So you're getting some pretty nice reinforcements coming back for the Dolphins. As far as the trade deadline goes, at this point, I would be fairly surprised if the Dolphins were big buyers. I don't know who's out there and would be available for you to trade for that makes sense, probably something more in the short term because of all the contract situations you have on the horizon next offseason. Maybe O-line depth, but I don't know that there's anyone out there that, would be necessarily worth trading for. I almost wonder if Miami would end up being sellers. I've heard some rumblings about Emmanuel Ogbah potentially being of interest to other teams. We'll see on that. He hasn't played very much the past 2 weeks. Still a good player in my eyes, just has the rotten luck of being in a scheme that doesn't utilize a player of that skill set. Maybe you look at someone on the interior defensive line, but they seem to be pretty much working with a three-man rotation of Wilkins, Sealer, and Raekwon Davis at the moment. Even Deshaun Hand's reps have been cut drastically, and then Brandon Pilley's been inactive for several weeks in a row. Other than that, I really don't see the Dolphins as big buyers. I think the Chase Claypool thing was kind of their dice roll earlier in the season, and I don't have any inside information on anything else that may or may not happen with the trade deadline. Those are just my thoughts on it. Now, the Kansas City Chiefs in Frankfurt, Germany. It's going to be an interesting one. It was interesting to hear Mike McDaniel state after the Dolphins game that they're going to travel on Monday. He wanted the players to have an off day on Tuesday and get a chance to, do some sightseeing, some touristy stuff, which I think is cool, and I also think it's smart. You talk to a lot of the teams that go to London, they want to get there and get players fully acclimated rather than showing up close to the game and having jet lag and all that. So I think that's a smart move. That was one of the logistical concerns I had about Miami's schedule prior to the start of the season. You got another one coming up soon with the Black Friday game against the Jets down the road, but a big trip to Frankfurt coming up, and it's going to be an interesting stadium. It's at, I think, Deutsche Bank Stadium, which is the home of the soccer club Eintracht Frankfurt. It's 42,000 and change seat stadium, so it would be the smallest in the NFL by a pretty good margin, about the size of a baseball stadium. But a point of note, if you actually go back, I think it's still on YouTube, you can watch the NFL Europe or NFL Europa documentary, and there's a whole section dedicated to the fans of the Frankfurt Galaxy. And that was the one team where every game, it was a party, it was a tailgate. The fans sold the thing out darn near every game. Andrew Luck's father, Oliver, was the commissioner of NFL Europe. He talks about it. So it should be a pretty cool atmosphere in Frankfurt. My family are of German descent. We're from Munich. So it would have been cool to go back. I've never been to Germany, but it would be cool to go back to the homeland sometime. But I wish everyone who's going to the game safe travels. Now, as far as it goes, a lot of marbles on the line. Because of the outcomes today, with the Chiefs losing to Denver, in the scores of the Baltimore and Jacksonville games, because of how the conference records stack up, if Miami beats Kansas City, the Dolphins are the number one seed in the AFC, no matter what, at 7-2. They would hold the tiebreakers over Baltimore and or Jacksonville, and would have two tiebreakers over the Chiefs, the head-to-head win and the conference record. A lot on the line. And I think the number one goal, the overriding theme for the Dolphins has to be to keep up the physicality that they've displayed on the defensive side of the ball the past couple weeks. Looking at the Chiefs going into their game against Denver today, so these rankings aren't reflective of the result of their 24-9 loss to the Broncos. But entering that game, the Chiefs, especially on defense, very physical team. They had the fourth best total defense in the entire NFL. They were second best in points allowed in the entire league at 15 per game. 15th in run defense, which, again, going into today, slightly better than Miami. They're giving up like 105 yards a game. Miami was at like 107. Like I told you, Miami's averages have really gone down since week 2, which is a good thing. The Chiefs are also 7th in pass defense. Offensively, they're about as you'd expect with a Patrick Mahomes-led team, regardless of who their backs and receivers are. They are number 2 in the league in total offense, behind only the Dolphins. They are 6th in points per game. They are 2nd in passing. This is the matchup that you want. This is an elite team, defending Super Bowl champions. And I emphasize if you get Teron Armstead off IR and able to play, Connor Williams back, and if you get Javon Holland, who should be back, and Xavier Howard back, you've got almost everyone other than like Devon Achane. You're fully loaded for this ball game. There's a huge amount on the line. Would love to see Miami come out with a win. And I feel like, at least given how physical Miami's defense has been and how much better they've been rushing the passer kind of really since, call it the Giants game, I think they've got a good chance to beat Kansas City in Frankfurt. But I think they have to figure out a way to eliminate the Chiefs' ground game and get pressure on Mahomes. He had some flu-like symptoms in the Broncos game today when they lost. You have to figure out a way to get some turnovers. Denver had 5 turnovers against Kansas City today, or forced 5 turnovers, I should say. Mahomes had 2 interceptions, and then they fumbled 3 other times. And then you have to outplay them on special teams. Again, I live in Cincinnati, or outside of Cincinnati. My whole family are Bengals fans. I've watched the Bengals-Chiefs back and forth for the past couple years in the AFC title game. Special teams did the Bengals in last year. They had a poor punt. They had a bad coverage on the return. Chiefs got good field position on both of those drives and got points from it. You have to play well on special teams. Today, of all days, against the Patriots of all teams, probably the best special teams performance we've seen the Dolphins have under Mike McDaniel. So kudos to Danny Crossman. Probably helps to have more of your guys back on special teams that are capable of playing. But you've got to play as close to that complimentary football game as you can. Even if you're down a lineman or 2, there's no reason you can't get some of the spacing on this team. And you look at some of the opponents the Chiefs have had to face on offense. The games haven't been pretty. Jacksonville put up, I think, 9 points in that game. They played Zach Wilson and the Jets. They played the Broncos twice now. Minnesota, which does have a pretty potent offense. I don't know that their defense is necessarily as good as those rankings are, but I have seen their defensive line play. They are very physical. They are good pass rushers. You have to figure out how to stop Chris Jones. But if you can do that, I think Miami has all the personnel and schematic makings of being able to beat a Chiefs team, especially in a neutral field. So that's going to do it for me tonight. That's going to end our show. We'll be able to record an episode next Sunday because the game kicks off at like 9 or 9:30 Eastern time on Sunday morning. So I'll have a show later that night out for Monday ready to go. Thank you guys for listening. You can give me a follow on Twitter at KevinMD4. Follow the show on iTunes, Spotify, wherever else you listen to your podcasts. Enjoy the victory Monday, a 31-17 season sweep of the New England Patriots, and a massive contest awaits the Dolphins in Frankfurt next Sunday. Again, that's our show. Tune in next week. Stay safe, stay healthy, fins up.